discussing the creation of 45 new constituencies by the Electoral Commission. A couple of days ago, the Electoral Commission announced its decision to create these new constituencies. This came on the back of government's announcement of creating 42 new districts. But the question is that why the need to create these new constituencies? And the opposition is of the view that this is an indirect pressure on the Electoral Commission to the advantage of the ruling government, the process which they refer to as gerrymandering. Tonight on PM Express, we'll be asking these questions plus more, and we'll be finding out whether the decision by the Electoral Commission to review these constituencies has any cause for worry. My name is Stephen Enti, and with me tonight to do this discussion, to my extreme left is Minority Leader Honorable Osechi Mensah-Bonsu, and then to my immediate left is Honorable Rashid Pelpo, who is Deputy Majority Leader. Gentlemen, you're welcome to PM Express.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, let me start with you, Minority Leader. What exactly is the position of the minority on the Electoral Commission's decision to create 45 new constituencies?
I guess you're not sure of the districts that have been created. As we sit here, I'm not too sure that the Deputy Majority Leader even can put his fingers on the number of districts that have been created. You refer to 42 districts that have been created. That is what we were told in the budget. It turned out not to be 42. The other day when we asked the minister responsible for local government, initially he said, well, the number is 43 and not 42. Later he said, oh, it's 44, not 42. So we are even not too sure of the number of districts that have been created, but that is an aside. You ask, what is our beef about the number of constituencies that the Electoral Commission intends to create? I don't think that it should be the beef of the minority or the MPP. It should be a matter of concern for Ghanaians. And all of us should think through whether or not what we are doing is the best for us as a country. First of all, it was the Electoral Commissioner himself who, in his engagement with the media, you used the word gerrymandering. Gerrymandering. And you said it is the opposition that is suspecting some gerrymandering. That word was not from us. It came from the Electoral Commissioner. He said that the president has created some districts, and that by that, necessarily, he must create constituencies to fit into those districts that may not have constituencies. But then he realizes that if he respond to that alone, that exercise may amount to gerrymandering. So those were the words of the Electoral Commissioner himself. And then he said, because of that, what he intends to do is to create constituencies in all regions, so that as much as possible, each region may have its own share. And he, according to him, that would be fairer than to responding merely to the creation of the districts. So those words.
But you don't think that the EC is pursuing this objective fairly, do you?
The point is, if the Electoral Commissioner tells Ghanaians that if I should respond to the creation of the districts by creating constituencies for those districts alone, then that exercise may amount to gerrymandering. The question then to ask is, what motive informed the creation of the districts in the first place? So those words are not ours. And I think that as a nation, we should engage our thinking on that. Beyond that, there are some other critical issues that should concern all of us as a nation. It is not for nothing that the Constitution provides that the review of boundaries, and of course, the power to review boundaries of constituencies is an obligation imposed on the Electoral Commission by Article 47, is it 5, that imposes that obligation on the Electoral Commission.
Clause 5.
Yes. So he has that imperative. But review, as I said, it's not for nothing that we link it to population census, the conduct of population census. Now, of course, there is other leg which says that it could be done 7 years or 10 years after the conduct of a national census. What it means is that the conduct of the census should give us an indication about population growth. Not merely population growth, but population drift as well, population densities and so on. And that should inform the review of the boundaries of the constituency.
So if I understand you clearly, is that you feel that the Electoral Commission has not been transparent enough to tell Ghanaians the rationale behind the decision they're taking or they're planning to take? Is that the point?
Because, you see, the Statistical Service came up with the census figures for various regions. As we speak today, nobody knows the population by district. They've told us that they will come later to inform us as a nation about that. So when we engaged the Electoral Commissioner, when he sounded to create the 45, we sought from him whether in the face of this fact that the Statistical Service has not supplied the nation with the district by district breakdown of the census, how come he's able to determine where to create constituencies? He told us that, well, he has the figures.
But you are not doubtful of the constitutional mandate of the Electoral Commission?
But the point is, should it be like some nocturnal transaction between the Electoral Commissioner and...
Why you describe us nocturnal? That's a bit harsh to...
Because the figures should be available to all of us as a nation. How come that you sitting here, you don't know, I sitting down here, I don't know, but the Electoral Commissioner, when we probe, tells us that, well, I have the figures. It shouldn't be that the figures should be passed on to the Commission alone. All of us have interest. All of us, the various NGOs, the various research institutions, have interest in the figures to be provided by the Statistical Service. It shouldn't be like, because we want to do this, you have it to do your job. Now, that is the worry.
Honorable Rashid Pelpo, you've heard Ose Chairman Sabonso. Are you in agreement with the concerns that the opposition is raising, which he's mentioned some of them, from your perspective as Deputy Majority Leader? What's your view on all this process and the decision to review the number of constituencies?
Well, thank you very much, and good evening to listeners. I think that the Electoral Commission has good reason to do what they are doing. And we have come to a point in our
good reason? I mean, how do you arrive at the conclusion that they have a good reason? Because I do know that by the provisions of Article 47, Clause 5, it is not discretionary. So if you're saying a good reason, can you just tell us why you conclude that they have good reason?
Reasoning is by some empirical evidence. And before you can take an action using reasoning, there must be a coherent trend of thoughts that will make you arrive at a certain conclusion. So they may have reasoned after they have received the census results, and after the president has created new districts in accordance with, again, the same constitution. It's enough for them to reason that there's a need for them to create new districts in accordance with the trends.
New constituencies.
Yes, or new constituencies, in accordance with the new trends that we are all observing. So I believe very strongly that they have good reason to do what they are doing. And again, as you said, quoting Article 47.5, they have the preserve to do what they are doing, to create new, to redesign boundaries of constituencies, to add or subtract constituencies, and to conduct elections and perhaps register voters and conduct elections. They have some 4 stages that they go through. So because of this mandate allocated to them or given them by the Constitution, I think that is their place to do what they are doing. You see, one of the things that we are likely to create for the state and for our electoral process is when you try to influence the decisions of the Electoral Commission.
So you think by the minority raising these concerns, they are indirectly influencing the Electoral Commission not to go ahead with the creation of these constituencies?
At the moment,
is that what
the concerns should feed into their ability and legal right to do it and do it well. It should not stop them from doing it.
You think these concerns are not being raised legally?
No, listen to what I'm saying. Okay. The concerns are legitimate. Concerns by all Ghanaians are legitimate. It's important that more and more we try to perfect our electoral system, and more we try to work with the Electoral Commission as key stakeholders, parties as key stakeholders to help them to straighten up the electoral system through practice, so we can rely on experience and tradition and make it better, apart from the legal framework that has been set. And I'm saying that if you want to bring out ideas about what is happening, it should help them to do what they are doing better. It should not stop them, because once they have taken a decision to do it, we can only help them to do it better. You can't stop them. So, because that is their place. The law has given them that mandate, and you can't take away that from them.
So, would you agree with the opposition view that the EC is perhaps bending to political pressure from the NDC government?
You see, from what I'm saying, you would have realized that I detest anything that is called pressure on them. The government should not pressurize them. The opposition should not pressurize them. They have a unique mandate allocated to them in the Constitution. That mandate is critical, and that mandate should be allowed to operate. And so I'm saying that what they are doing now should only be influenced as far as to help them to perfect the system. It should not be influenced to deviate from the core principle of their conducting elections for us, of their redesigning boundaries, and doing all the things that are going to ensure that we deliver a fair, true, fair,
transparent
elections. And also to strengthen the integrity of the system. And that is what the Electoral Commission is all about. So don't criticize them to death. Don't criticize them to the extent that the public loses confidence in them. And that's just what I'm saying.
Is that what the minority is seeking to do? You're over-criticizing the EC for the public to be losing interest in them? Is that what you're seeking to do?
I think it will be stretching this too far, and I think nobody should pursue that course at all.
But
we criticize to reform and not to destroy. And I've already indicated that the Electoral Commission has that obligation imposed upon it by the Constitution, Article 47(5), to review the boundaries of constituencies. The review, we must all agree, doesn't necessarily have to translate into upward adjustment of the figures always. It doesn't. I don't know of any democracy where this is the order of the time, such that every 10 years we review upwards.
But in 2004, your party was in government at the time. The EC in your regime started the process of reviewing, and they did indeed review upwards.
First of all, yes. At the time, some of us raised the issue whether or not we could go on this path. Of course, my voice was not as deep as perhaps today. I'm talking about at the time.
Yeah.
However, I don't want us to go there, because then somebody would say that, well, it was also during the...
Why shouldn't we go there?
No, I'm saying
that will be a reference point for us.
The reference point then would also then have to go, back to the initial creation of 200 constituencies. Before we started in 2000, in 1992, it used to be 140. It was during the era of the PNDC, when entering into the Fourth Republic, the numbers increased to 200. Hitherto it had been 140. That's why I'm saying that I don't want us to go there. In any event, if somebody committed murder yesterday and the person was not caught, would you say that if anybody did it today, it would be justified? What I mean is that if something was bad yesterday, or I wouldn't say it was bad, was not good yesterday, it cannot be justified today. However, let's even make the distinction. What happened in 2004? The Electoral Commission created constituencies. Thereafter, districts were created. Today, districts have been created, and the Electoral Commission's hand is forced to create constituencies. That's the difference. But I'm saying that I don't even want us to go into how they came about in the first place. What, as a nation, we should concern ourselves with is the fact that we can't go on this path of giving ritualistic interpretation to this, that, as my colleague said, that he has good reason to believe that they have the right to create it, and what they are doing, there's nothing wrong with that. The Electoral Commission is made up of human beings who are prone to error. And as a nation, we must review their own decisions to see whether or not it inures to the benefit of this country. And I'm saying that I do not in any way disapprove of the fact that the Constitution imposes an obligation on them. But I'm saying that I don't know of any democracy when every 10 years the numbers of their parliament keeps increasing. As a side note, I was telling colleagues that, and my colleague, the Honorable Rashid, would bear with me that as the architecture of parliament is today, I don't even know how we are going to accommodate 45 people. I don't even know how. And the Electoral Commission, when the attention was drawn to it, responded that, well, in Westminster, a lot of members of parliament stand. They have nowhere to sit. So if we have such a situation in Ghana, he doesn't worry. And I thought it was most unfortunate. But talking about constitutional imperatives, he says he finds solace in Article 47.5, which says that, well, he can review the boundaries. But then he distances himself quickly from Article 47.3, which suggests that there should be a population quota. That one is a constitutional imperative. And then he says, for that one, when we ask the question, he said, well, I have a formula. What is the formula? He says, I have assigned weights. Land is 1, population is 9. That is the formula. So what does the formula translate into by way of population quota, which is a constitutional imperative in 47.3?
So you think that the Electoral Commission is creating these situations for the doubts you're having and
yes,
the concerns you're raising?
Unnecessarily. And it shouldn't go into that. And then you see, I have always argued that democracy is about representation. Representation is about people. And it's not about land, it's not about rivers, it's not about forest. The Constitution, yes, in Article 47.4, mentions some landmarks that they should provide guide to the Electoral Commission in demarcating constituency boundaries. It even talks about administrative districts and even traditional areas that in demarcating constituency boundaries, you should factor all these into consideration. But the ultimate consideration is population. That is why the Constitution talks about population quota. And I was discussing this with my colleague on air this morning. It's not for nothing that in the UK today, they are considering bringing down their numbers. In Canada, they are considering bringing down their numbers. About 6 months ago, the majority leader and I had the privilege to travel to Korea. Deliberately, I provoked this question. And they said, well, as a nation, we have agreed on a figure for our people. So over the past 30 years, we have not increased by 1. And we intend to maintain it. What in established democracies keeps altering is the population quota. It is not the number of constituencies, because we can't go on interminably on this line. And if we should look at population, today, as we speak, the current census provides that Ashanti region has the highest population, followed by Greater Accra. And then the next is the Northern region. So going by that, we should have a situation where Ashanti region will have the highest, followed by Greater Accra, and the next region necessarily must be the Northern region. But by their own arrangement, it is the Eastern region, even though the Northern region's population outnumbers that of Eastern region. And going by their own formula, the land size of the Northern region is far bigger than that of the Eastern region. So how come that the Eastern region has, without disrespect, with no disrespect to Eastern region? I'm saying that going by their own yardstick, they have found, one can fault them. And if you go by population, how come that Greater Accra, by their own reckoning, is going to have 34? Greater Accra with 4 million, over 4 million is going to have 34. Northern region with 2.4 is going to have 31. Just a difference of 3. And Eastern region is going to surpass Greater Accra, Northern region. So it means there's something basically wrong with their own arrangement.
Right, you're listening to PM Express, and I have with me Deputy Majority Leader Honorable Rashid Pelpo and Minority Leader Honorable Sir Chairman Sabonso, and we are discussing the creation of constituencies by the Electoral Commission for 2012. Honorable Chairman Sabonso, you mentioned that the ultimate consideration here should be population. Honorable Pelpo, tell us what informed the decision of government to create these new districts.
Well, it's the law of the land, which is the Constitution, which has spelled it out and said that between, at every point in time, after 10 years, taking into consideration population growth, either growth or contraction or expansion or shifting of population or whatever the case is, we create new districts. And so government is responding to the dictates of the Constitution, which is written by Ghanaians themselves. And so it's not as if it was something taken arbitrary. It's in accordance with the laws of the land. Also, I think that definitely the population of this country 10 years ago is different from the population today. And the heart of it all is about representation. People have to be represented, in whatever form they find themselves.
But that's the issue. The minority and the recent court decision against the Electoral Commission is seeking to say that there is not fair representation in the creation of these constituencies. And yet you're mentioning that representation was one of the considerations for creating these new districts.
Yeah, representation is critical in creating new districts and in creating new constituencies, because the ultimate of it all is, one, the share of resources, and political representation, too. And so if you want to share resources, we are talking about creation of new districts to allow for new growing societies to have a fair representation in the share of the national case through the allocation of districts to them. And after that happens, you know that no districts, no one district should have maybe two constituencies in them.
I will come in here. I'm told we have Ben Epson, election watcher, on the line, joining us directly. We would be exploring the allegations, the suggestion that this could be a kind of gerrymandering in favor of the ruling government. Ben Epson, good evening and thanks for joining us on PM Express.
Thank you very much and good evening to your viewers.
Thank you very much. Now, you've heard suggestions that this could be an indirect pressure on the Electoral Commission in favor of the ruling government. Now, election is barely 5 months away. As an election watcher, standing from where you are standing, what do you see?
Well, thank you very much. I think that Dr. Farijan has put it on record that them increasing it by 45 years will not affect their timetable. I think we need to bear in mind that the EC, the formula they use, that is population and land size, has proven to be the best. If you are dealing with populations only, one straight scenario is going to be that there are more people in Wager and Ablekuma South in Greater Accra than in all the 10 constituencies in Upper West. So if you are dealing with population alone, then in effect, we are saying that Upper West should have 2 MPs, and then Ablekuma South and Wager should have 10 MPs.
So Ms. Epson, let me come in. So your view is that the minority's position and the recent court case against the Electoral Commission, which says that this is unfair in terms of representation and numbers, you disagree. You think that the Electoral Commission is absolutely on the right course to use this formula in creating the constituencies?
That is right. Otherwise, for example, Sheriff Nidodo, who placed second to Shelai Kobotwe, had 51,000 votes. And there are people in Parliament now who are in Parliament with less than 5,000 votes by their names. Now, I think that if you look at 47.5 again, the word there is review. But for example, the Electoral Commission, I'm sure, has over the time explained that whilst review does not imply increase, it is going to be a bit ridiculous to ask like the Upper West region that, look, because of population shifts in Greater Accra and Ashanti, reduce your members of parliament from 10 to 5, so that we give the 5 to Greater Accra and Ashanti, for example. I also agree that, yes, we cannot have an increase in members of parliament in perpetuity. Then, as all stakeholders, we sit down and agree that, okay, to take account of maybe population changes, we'll say, look, every 10 years we increase by 5. So the Electoral Commission can then do their increases, share the 5 among the others.
There have also been questions, Mr. Efson, that why is it that we always have to increase the number of constituencies and not go by the United Kingdom's example by reducing the constituencies, for example? What's your take on that?
That's what I'm saying. That my take is that the constitution for which we all have sworn to defend says that 47.5 says you must review. I agree that review does not imply increase, but logically it's going to be ridiculous to ask a region to reduce their number of MPs so that we can give it to other regions who have been great phenomenons. If you look at the current increases to the projected 45, Ashanti region has the biggest population in terms of census. They have 8. Greater Accra has 7, even though in terms of voters, Greater Accra has more votes. So I agree with you that yes, we can, like in 2004, it was increased by 30. In 2012, it's been increased by 45. Maybe 10 years on to be increased by 80. I think that if we all agree that we cannot have maybe an average of 25, 30 every 4-8 years, then our parliament who could represent us could pass an airline or could amend the constitution. That if we are talking about review, there must be, say, okay, every 10 years, the EC should increase by 5 depending on population and limit it at 5.
Right, so before I let you go, tell me, in the event that the Electoral Commission goes ahead to create these new constituencies, what is that going to mean for the elections 2012? Because this is a major concern, right?
Yes, I think that, I mean, in 2004, if you look at the 30 of which were added on, it was almost split 15-15. Now, if you look at the 45 seats that the EC intends to, the 20 of them are as a result of the formula that they use, and 25 are a result of the creation of 45 new districts. Now, the 45 new districts, some have been created in Volta region, which happens to be the stronghold of the NDC, and some have been created in Ashanti. So it is when the full list of names come in that we'll have an idea, but I have a feeling it will almost be split because the fact that a constituency has been, a district has been created does not presuppose automatically that there will be a new constitution, that there will be a new constituency.
Thank you very much. That was Ben Efson. He's an election watcher. Honorable Purple, you heard Ben Efson. Now, before I went on the line, you were justifying the reasons why government created these new constituencies based on which the EC has come up with suggestions to also create government creating new districts, and based on which Electoral Commission is also creating new constituencies. So you were in agreement. Were you in agreement with what Mr. Efson was saying?
Yeah, he's doing some analysis different from the reasons government has created these new districts.
So, if I understand, government didn't take into consideration election issues before creating these districts.
What government did, you know, the reason for the creation of the new constituencies are of twofold. One, because of population, and because of the permutation that they use, population and then landmarks. or land area, land mass, and the size of the land and the size of the population, which they try to use to justify the creation of new constituencies. The other was the creation of the new districts, which has necessitated, the EC stretching the number of constituencies beyond their expected numbers. So they are twofolds. Now, one came as a result of an unavoidable situation of growing population. The other came as a result of government policy or government action, all of which have a foundation in the constituency. The Constitution, because the Constitution has mandated the president to create new districts as and when the need arises. The same Constitution has mandated the EC to create new constituencies, within the space of 10 years. So and I was saying that the fundamental reason we constantly have to create constituencies in accordance with the dictates of the Constitution are two. One, population. Two, representation. And by representation, we mean that every person, person by definition of a person, not just a single person, but every people having the same, living in an area, seeking to develop themselves, aspiring to transform their lives, need to be represented. They need to have a representation that coincides with their expectations. So you will find that in the Upper West region, even though we have a voter population of 350,000, you still have about 10 members of parliament there, because you are talking about a person, somebody who needs to be represented despite who he is, And again, we are talking also about population, and that's why I think that wager with a voter population of close to 200,000 will have to have a split in the constituency, because as the population grows, as new people come to settle in the place, there's a need for them not to be dependent on one person who will be speaking to them in parliament. Their varied ideas and expectations are also increasing. And so there's a need for government to take into consideration all these things and eventually create new constituencies. So I think that what government has done is founded on
legality.
The legal frame is also founded on practical experience of how the population is growing in terms of numbers of people drifting to one area or the other, and new people being given birth to, and who need to be part and parcel of the decision-making process. Our constitution and our democracy are critical to us, and democracy foretells a situation where people and their ideas, can be represented by somebody. So I think that what is happening now is not out of place at all. And I think government, we should help government to perfect the system. But again, we need to begin to question ourselves too, whether we should allow this process to go on. How can we have a parliament that grows like a tree every time a new branch is growing?
Yeah, talking about parliament which is growing,
yes,
and shifting away from the dynamics of the population. Honorable Seche,
no, it's not shifting away from the dynamics of it's rather shifting in accordance with the dynamics of the population. And I'm saying that it's necessary to begin to question how it is that our parliament should continue growing on end. There should be a point in time when we say that, look, our parliament should have a certain amount of number.
And it's exactly the point Ben Hefsin was making, that perhaps it's time to introduce a legislative instrument which will put a cap on the numbers. Honorable Seche Mensah-Bonsu, so there have been concerns from the minority side of the cost implications of new constituencies to parliament, for example, increasing number of seats, etc. Do you think such concerns are fair on a country like Ghana?
Well, before coming there, I think let me respond to the issue that Ben raised.
Yes.
Ben is justifying what is happening today. At the same time, in another breath, he's saying that, well, it would be unreasonable to increase in perpetuity. What he doesn't agree is that now it shouldn't be discussed because now it's okay. I find it very, very contradictory.
He didn't say that expressly.
Yes, he said, and I quoted it, that it is unreasonable, it would be unreasonable to increase in perpetuity. But he justifies what is happening now, that for now, yes, what the Electoral Commission has done is all right.
I think that's fair to
say
that.
So I'm saying that why not put the two on the cards and justify the two together rather than making a distinction? Because you see, if it is bad, it's going to be bad tomorrow. If it's done today, it may not be good. So the thing is, can we increase in perpetuity? We cannot. And let's look at it this way. Nigeria, their population is about 6 times that of Ghana's population, right?
Yes.
The number of parliamentarians in Nigeria is about 600, right? We started with 200. We are moving towards 275, right? Almost half of Nigeria's population. When we began with 200, the population was 18 million. So it means that 36 million, the number would increase to 400, going by this pace. It's certainly unreasonable, and people must, confront this boldly. Besides, Ben is saying that, my colleague here agrees with me, that ultimately we cannot keep on increasing. Ben says that he draws the distinction between Wager and Upper West and says that if Wager should have 2 members of parliament, then the whole of Upper West will have 2 members of parliament. It doesn't necessarily mean that. What the language of the Constitution is that, and that is provided for in Article 47.3. And with respect, let me quote that. It says, the boundaries of each constituency shall be such that the number of inhabitants in the constituency is, as nearly as possible, equal to the population quota. Yes, as nearly as possible, equal to the population quota. Now, we have 230 constituencies. Today, the number is about 25 million. If you divide it by 230, 25 million by 230, you're going to get something in the region of about 110,000. When the Constitution is very careful not to apply a strict figure of a population quota. That's why it says that as nearly as possible. So everywhere else in the world where democracy is entrenched, they give themselves some band. When the population quota, for instance, maybe translates to about 110,000 for Ghana, we could then agree, per the Electoral Commission's own, formula, that okay, it cannot be 110 flat for each constituency. That is unattainable. So we would agree that, okay, if maybe this is the quota, but plus or minus 20,000, for instance, I'm just quoting an arbitrary figure, plus or minus 20,000, you qualify for a constituency, which then may mean that if you hit 130,000, then the spillover should go to another constituency. That is where the engineering of the boundaries come in. If you are less than 90,000, you don't qualify for a constituency. Then the engineering comes in. That is how it happens everywhere. Ben says that it would be ridiculous to maybe collapse some boundaries. I find that very intriguing. That's what happens everywhere. Everywhere where democracy is entrenched, that's what happens. For instance, today we all know that population is drifting towards the western region, Sekondi Takoradi. If by God's grace we discover other fields, I'll tell you that the next 10 years, the population of Sekondi Takoradi may be increased more than 2 times.
Right.
And Kumasi would have lost seats. And if it happens that way, it shouldn't worry anybody if the 10 seats of Kumasi are collapsed to maybe constitute 8 seats, whereas Sekondi Takoradi, which now has 4, perhaps may have 6 or 5. That is what happens everywhere. Today, in Edmonton, I was there in Canada about 5 months ago, and Edmonton, the province where Edmonton is, they are collapsing constituencies and drifting to where what do they call it? The black sands, the new discovery of oil. They refer to them as the black sands. The population is drifting there massively. So they are increasing the size of the constituency, the numbers of the constituencies there by 2 more, and collapsing where other places where population is drifting away from. That is the principle of alteration of boundaries.
Honorable Sir Chairman Sabonso, I need to establish the legality behind the taking into effect of any new constituencies that are created by the Electoral Commission. What does the law say that if the Electoral Commission goes ahead, despite these concerns that you have raised and other people have raised, to create the new constituencies? When is it expected to take effect? What does the Constitution say?
To be honest, I don't want to go into those legalities. I have my own understanding of what the Constitution provides. That is in Article 47(6). Some people disagree because, of course, they say that, well, it has happened earlier and this is what was done. I don't want personally to go on that path. It will be left to maybe whoever decides to take that matter up to pursue it. I think that, as a matter of fact, the language of the Constitution is clear in 47(6).
So tell me quickly, do you think the EC should go ahead to create these new constituencies?
Well, if he wants to create, he could create, but the 47(6) talks about when it should take effect. That's another matter. But I think I must quickly also add that my colleague talked about the constitutional imperative. The EC is acting within the confines of the Constitution. That is, he's acting within the remit of legalities. But let's face it, the EC in acting on his own actions should be based on not only legality, but rationality as well. Is it rational, what you are doing? It may be legal, but is it rational? That should be something for the EC. And then the districts the question that you posed to my colleague, when we met him, he was blunt. He said, look, some of these districts that are being created are not viable. They can't even stand on their feet. So why continue to create new districts when you know that they may not be viable? That's food for thought for all of us. The concept of decentralization, creating districts, is to, reinforce decentralization, bring government to the doorsteps of people. But to what extent? How far downstream can we go?
Well, we have a few of our messages from Facebook. Prince Albert Ronnie says that creating new constituencies in 6 months to election is not necessary. And Dixon Desire from Laura says President Mills and his NDC is doing all they can to win the December elections by registering prisoners to vote, etc. And then Mashoud Yakubu says the MPP should give us a break. When they are in charge, everything is fine. But when they are in opposition, they see everything wrong. I support the Electoral Commission. Now, Honorable Pelpo, your final words. I
also support the Electoral Commission. It's a very important...
He didn't say he supports it. He was reading the text.
He said, yeah.
This is a message
that's what I'm saying. It's a very important political, in fact, constitutional responsibility they are performing. Everybody needs to be represented, and what they are doing is in accordance with the development process that we are experiencing in terms of population, in terms of our development needs, share of resources, and et cetera, et cetera. But let me go to the question. He cited Nigeria as a clear example of 600. And Nigeria is a federal state. In each of their states, they have a parliament in each of the states. Representation is not a problem at all. We are talking about the federal government, which is collapsing all Nigeria into that small place.
Okay.
And they have a Senate. So representation is not a problem in Nigeria. But again, in the UK as well. In the UK, there has never been a time when they have reduced parliament. There's a thought of it now.
Well, I'm sure the debate will continue. Honorable Pelpo and Honorable Sechem and Sabon. So I'm very grateful for your time.
Can I have 15 seconds?
Sorry, I cut him off.
Yes, just 15 seconds. Just in a serious matter. Because you see, when Ben said that, he said the mixture of population and land considerations is best for us. He may have to explain to us how come that Northern region is bigger than the Eastern region, has a higher population than the Eastern region. But by the reckoning of the Electoral Commission, they have fewer seats. They are going to have fewer seats.
Well, I guess the debate will continue from outside the studios and in your homes and wherever you're watching.